All right, good day, everybody. I want to welcome you all out to our lunch and learn. We've gone virtual because of the avian influenza situation here on Delmarva. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. John Moyle. I'm with the University of Maryland Extension. And we also have Jenny Rhodes with Extension on here, as well as Sheila, who you probably get emails from. She's always the assistant in the background that doesn't get much recognition. With that, we want to welcome you all out today. We have a guest speaker from the University of Kentucky. We have Dr. Jordan Shockley, and he's going to talk to us a little bit today about economics and what can happen with your farm if you don't practice good biosecurity. Jordan?
Yes, well, thank you all for the invitation. Uh, as some of you all probably saw from the flyer, I am originally from Maryland, the Eastern Shore of Maryland. First, first job there as a young kid was working in the broiler houses, picking up chickens. And so, um, when I got to Kentucky about 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to dabble in some of the poultry space here in the state and did some analysis a few years ago on the impacts of HPAI that I'd like to, kind of share with you today and the importance of biosecurity given kind of how the system works and the length of time you can potentially be out of flocks. And there's a pretty substantial economic impact that can happen. And so appreciate giving the opportunity to talk to y'all this afternoon. And so where I'd like to start here is kind of looking at cases, right? If you look back to 2022, the table on the left there, or chart on the left there is the number in the millions of birds that are affected by HPAI by year. And on the right is the number of cases that happen per year in each of our poultry sectors. And so you can see here that, that commercial egg operations are have been hit hard and continue to be hit. We are on track this year to, again, we are only in February, and so you can see the blue line there representing 2025. We're surpassing the halfway mark already in February on commercial egg cases and birds affected. So that's kind of what we've seen here in the news recently of egg prices going through the roof, $10 dozen eggs, because HPA is really impacting our broiler or our layer operations. But we all know in your neck of the woods, we're talking about broiler operations, and so while not as many birds are impacted on the broiler side of things, it's still a major issue. And so biosecurity is going to be key as we move forward to try to combat high path avian influenza. And so when we look at the economic impact, of the past few outbreaks, this original one back in 14, 15, we had 50 million chickens and turkeys died. It had a $1.2 billion economic impact, which cost our taxpayers about $950 million. The most recent numbers we have for the 2022 outbreak, you're looking at, more birds died and a 2.5 to $3 billion impact. If we continue on this trend this year, 2025 looks like it's going to be higher than 2022, which is not good. And so, what are those farm level impacts that we see? We're bringing this back down to the farm level. When these outbreaks start happening, right, this quarantine zone gets put in, and APHIS comes in, and you have to realize that these indemnity payments that occur, provides financial aid for depopulation, disposal, and virus elimination. And, all of these having a flock plan to receive compensation contractors typically carry out these depopulation disposal, and you get paid a flat rate per bird. But what's important to understand here is that these indemnity payments are only on the birds that are affected. Okay. And growers are not necessarily guaranteed that indemnity payment because the payment goes to the owners of the birds, which is the integrators. Now, I haven't heard of any cases of it necessarily not going back to the grower themselves, but that is not guaranteed. And again, these payments are only on the birds infected, and we all know, if you've seen cases, that time frame of those birds getting depopulated, infection happening, population, and then being able to receive new birds, right? That time frame can vary substantially, potentially 4 to 5 months. And so that means that you are delayed flocks, or you've basically missed out on flocks throughout the year. And so those missed flocks are not part of these indemnity payments, which is an issue, right? That's an out-of-pocket expense to the growers that we need to quantify and understand those impacts. What's also interesting is a new interim final rule from USDA APHIS regarding HPAI and in these indemnity payments. If you look back, which is interesting, in 2022, 1,200 producers received indemnity payments. However, there were multiple unique circumstances where the same farm had at least 2 HPA outbreaks. There were 67 occurrences of that, and 18 occurrences of that same farm having 3 outbreaks in the year. And if you think about this, those reinfections, out of the $1.1 billion that was paid out in indemnity payments only, $365 million of that were to these unique reinfections. Okay, so it is USDA's goal to try to root out these multiple infections on the same premises. And so there is now post biosecurity audit before restocking to receive any future indemnity payments. These biosecurity audits have to happen within the quarantine zone prior to every movement on the poultry premises. And if you do not make the corrections that are highlighted by the audit, you will not be eligible for any future indemnity payments. So if you have gotten an outbreak and you don't comply with the audit and you lose a future flock, you are not going to be paid any indemnity payments for any future infections. And so back when we looked at this, not getting payments, whether it's from this new rule or for out of the time out to repopulate those barns, will have a substantial financial impact on the producer. Insurance is rare in this space, and as I've talked about this in the past, producers are wanting insurance protection, but we don't know what that financial impact is, and there's moral hazard issues that the poultry industry faces with insurance. And so we really need to show and illustrate, which is part of what we'll discuss today, that farm level financial impact in hopes of promoting and continuing diligent biosecurity. And so I'm going to walk through an example that we put together a few years ago as an example for Kentucky. Kentucky has 120 counties. We are depending on what year, seventh, eighth in the nation in broiler production. And there is a small county in the western part of the state, McLean County, Kentucky. You can see here, this is a perfect description of sizing of this county. That county has the largest concentration by size in Kentucky of poultry houses, broiler houses. And there's 350 broiler houses in that county. And you can see if one of those houses gets infected, there's your quarantine radius. So basically, the entire county will be in quarantine mode. Okay, if one of those houses gets an outbreak. And so what we looked at is a 4-house broiler operation, roughly 32,000 birds per house, 56-day grow out period, and a 17-day clean out period, which is kind of typical at that time for producers in Kentucky. If you want full access to this research paper, you can see there's the reference there below that you can go dig into if you want some more details, but we'll walk through some of the key highlights of this research here today. So what we did, we looked at some real farmer data collected through the Kentucky Agricultural Finance Corporation. Kentucky Ag Finance Corporation is a organization that provides financing for various agricultural loans. This is, I believe, part of the major tobacco buyout a long time ago. And interesting enough, roughly 40% of the portfolio are poultry house loans. And so I was able to look through those loan applications and get some of the costs associated with those loan packs at the time. We also pulled some of our own basically production and cost information from Kentucky producers that are in the Kentucky Farm Business Management Association. So again, using real production cost information. And what we did was basically just develop some traditional financial statements that we think about in agriculture. And those income statements, balance sheets, cash flows, and then basically financial performance measures. And what we did, we looked across the 20-year investment of these 4 poultry house facilities. And then basically we shocked the system. And so what happens if this farm, 4 houses, get HPAI? And what happens to their financials with these shocks at different infection periods? What I mean by different infection periods, different times throughout that 20-year investment. Interesting enough, with these programs, we looked at 2 types of scenarios. And what I mean by scenarios, 2 types of farmers. We all know that a good way we've seen traditionally to bring beginning or new farmers or the next generation back to the farm is through poultry houses. And we're seeing that a lot in Kentucky. And so what we looked at is, okay, a beginning farmer coming back to the farm that's invested in a poultry operation. And then what we're going to call an experienced farmer that has been in the poultry business for a while. And so we define beginning farmers. You can see here it's not owned a farm for more than 10 years, combined net worth of less than 500,000, and an annual off-farm income of less than 100,000. Again, I mentioned these timings, and so what we're going to look at is what happens if you get high path avian influenza in year 2, year 10, and year 18 of the life of that poultry facility. And then we're also looking at 3 lengths of times out, or what we call flocks lost. So we'll look at either 1, 2, or 3 flocks that you would lose, right, if you contracted HPAI. So that could be, okay, I got HPAI, I lost that flock, right, and I'm going to get paid on that indemnity. And then because of timeout, I've only lost 1 additional flock. So that would be considered 1 flock that you're not getting paid for. Okay. Or it could be, under these new rules, this is my second time contracting HPAI, and I've lost that flock that I didn't get paid for, and additional flocks out because of time to clean out. Okay. And so what we see here is the financial implications looking at flocks out and the shocks along that year 2, year 10, and year 18 time frame. And so if you built a new house and in year 2 you got HPAI, that's and for just lost one flock that you didn't get paid for, that financial implication is 96, almost $97,000 or $47,000. Sorry. So what does this mean? Means that this is out of pocket. So this is the on-farm equity, basically to self-insure yourself against an HPAI outbreak. As you can see, the more flocks that you're not getting paid for because it may take longer to clean out and get certified to bring in a new flock, that impact increases substantially. And basically, 3 flocks out year 2 is $158,000 you have to have in on-farm equity to self-insure. Okay. Putting this into a different perspective, and I presented this back at the peak conference late last year, I think it was, John, and you asked a question there on kind of return on investment of biosecurity, and I kind of use this, and this is kind of we're going to call it a proxy to try to address that question. And so if you look at those numbers and come up with kind of a rough estimate, basically, if you were to spend $4,737 a year on biosecurity alone, and you were guaranteed, which I know that's tough, that biosecurity would prevent that outbreak, right? That would be your equivalent cost to this $46,512 financial impact. So you can spend the equivalent of $4,700 a year to prevent that occurrence from happening. So that's what we would either break even, and anything less than that you would spend, right, would have a positive return on investment for preventing that occurrence from happening. So if you look across all examples, okay, you can see here that if 3 flocks are out in that year 2, that you could spend $16,000 a year on biosecurity, and anything less than that would have a positive return on investment. Again, assuming that those efforts would prevent an outbreak from occurring. Now, what you can say is, well, you can spend half of that and would reduce your probability of a HPI infection by 50%. So there's different ways to look at this, but we try to put this into a figure of a kind of a return on investment to address your question that you proposed, John. So best try at that. Hopefully it gets at your question that you're asking a few months ago. Another way to look at this is total equity on the operation. So this is through time of that investment, and shocking that system at year 2. Okay, so you can see here, this is on the left-hand column there, that's your total equity in that poultry business in years across time. That left arrow is that shock that happens in year 2. You can see that Blue line is the base case scenario with no shock. Okay. And the yellow, see if I can, that yellow right here is the 3 flocks out scenario. And so if you get hit in that year 2, it would take roughly 8 years to then catch up and have positive total equity in that farming operation if you were 3 flocks out. Okay. What's interesting here is this is the same example, but with that beginning farmer. It's important to note here, you may see this on here, that we start out from a base case with negative equity. This analysis was done before integrators were providing financial incentives or bonuses to build poultry houses to make them cash flow in year 1. Okay. So under that scenario, it even took roughly 6 years for a beginning farmer to surpass that 0, be positive in total equity. Same shock here. Again, it takes 10 years to recover for a beginning farmer. Okay. So the financial implications of HPAI is a lot more significant for a beginning farmer with less equity in the business to start, which means if you're a beginning farmer, it's more important to implement biosecurity practices because of the financial ramifications. What's interesting here to look at is one of the most common measures we look at from an economic and financial perspective is what's called ROA, or return on farm assets. Okay, this is a common practice used across agriculture. And what this does is it tracks that return on assets. You can see how that's calculated up in the right-hand corner there. As we go through time, the greater the number, the better. But what's interesting is once you get that shock in year 2, all of your scenarios with HPAI have a higher return on assets, rate of return on assets, which is weird, right? And not a good story to tell. And it's actually it's a fallacy with how we calculate return on assets. You can look at the denominator there. We're dividing by farm assets. Well, if you have a HPAI outbreak and you have to depopulate and you lose income, right? Your farm assets actually go down. So a lower number in the denominator actually increases that return on assets because it's a contract business, right? As soon as you get repopulated, you've got that contract in place, your operating income kicks back up and that numerator stays the same up here with less farm assets because of the shock. Okay. So there really needs we need to look at this a little bit differently to measure profitability in a broiler house contract environment, because this is not really depicting the financial implications of HPAI outbreak correctly. And so what we come up with is 2 measures, kind of a short-term and a long-term measure. But what we call, first one is called burn rate. Okay. And you can see the calculation there, but really what this is the length of time a business can continue to operate on existing working capital. So that working capital, or that money in the bank or money in the business, right? So if a burn rate is less than 0, okay, that's how many periods that you need basically outside financial help. to continue to operate. Okay. The other one is what we call a long-term vulnerability index. Okay. You see that calculation there, but really what this is that number of periods the business can sustain operations through liquidating of assets or equity by either selling assets or borrowing against them. So that LTV or long-term vulnerability index less than zero, basically your broiler operation, it can't cover your cost and you have no equity to borrow against it because you've basically liquidated all of those assets. Therefore, you have to either shut down, declare bankruptcy, or use some sort of off-farm income in the short term to keep that broiler house operating. So what we see here is the burn rate. Again, remember anything below zero is an issue. And so if you have one flock out as an experienced farmer, okay, you're still right at that little bit above zero. However, if you get that shock in year two and you're 3 flocks out, right, your negative burn rate below your operating cost, and it takes roughly 5 years to recover before you build up and have a positive burn rate. You can see here, this is that first one's for the experienced farmer. Again, it's more important for the beginning farmer from a financial aspect because it would take roughly outbreak happens year 2, worst case scenario year 11 until you get a positive burn rate. Okay, so you don't have enough working capital in the business to be able to support that for roughly 9 years. Here's that LTVI or long-term vulnerability index. Again, liquidating capital. This is the experienced farmer. It happens if you one flock out, that you're out of pocket, you are negative zero in the short term, where you're going to have to provide some off-farm income to kind of keep that financial stability of that broiler operation afloat. Okay, you lose 3 flocks, we have some serious issues if you're out 3 flocks. Okay, and so you're going to have to look for financial support, operating notes or something to keep the business afloat. Again, we see here even worse, same story for the beginning farmer. Okay, so again, to wrap things up, keep it short and sweet today. You know, hopefully this shows that there is a huge financial impact on the grower, right? Financially, cash flow, all that good stuff. And because this financial implication, you know, these indemnity programs are really important. And that quick turnaround needed to clean out and disinfect and to get repopulated is going to be key, so you don't lose those, you know, let's say up to 3 flocks because of that time that it takes to get repopulated. Again, be aware of this new indemnity rule. Biosecurity is going to be important, and these audits that are coming down the pipe for multiple infections could really be financially an issue. Again, early contraction of the virus can be catastrophic, especially for beginning farmers. We have these issues with some financial measures and profitability measures. So we have these new indexes to look out. Again, hopefully this analysis provides, you know, the foundation for coming up with fair premiums for poultry producers, for insurance, to protect against revenue insurance for high-path avian influenza. This got proposed back in 2023. It's the Healthy Poultry Assistance and Indemnity Act. I checked yesterday, and it is just still sitting there. I don't know what the current status is on this act, but it is similar to Pennsylvania's High Path AI Recovery Reimbursement Program, where you can see here what type of coverage it happens within for financial losses, which also includes that quarantine zone that's available. So with that, here's my contact information. If you have any questions, happy to take them now, or email, phone, all that good stuff. So with that,
Thank you, Jordan. We appreciate that. Are there any questions? If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. If you are a Maryland farmer and you want to get nutrient management credits, please put your name also in the chat box and put MD afterwards, so we know that that's what you're going to look for. For Delaware, I will share a screen. Here is a QR code for Delawareans that they can scan and go through and get their nutrient management questions that way. That said, are there any questions for Jordan at this time?
Don, we got a question.
Go for it. I got screen up. Go.
Were the reinfections on broilers, layers, or turkeys?
I do not have the details on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
Do you remember
I can't remember
which county was it in? That might help us.
those. They never even said locations.
So yeah, I know there's been reinfections in some of the layer operations and turkeys,
Yeah.
but I haven't heard of any on the broiler side yet.
I haven't either. Just from the sheer number of cases, I would assume it would be either the layers or the turkeys. But yeah, I'm not sure. But
Okay.
18 cases of contracting 3 times in 1 year is pretty
Yeah.
bad.
Again, any other questions, folks, you have, please put them into the chat.
You can unmute if that's easier too. If anybody has. It's a great.
Raise your hand. I think I have to ask him to let him unmute.
Oh, okay. It's a great presentation, Jordan.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jenny.
A lot of good information. There.
Well, not seeing any other questions.
I would just say if there's any Delaware people that can't use the QR code, or if they can also put their name in and just put Delaware next to their name or DE next to their name in the chat.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.
Maybe somebody wants to ask a question without being recorded.